Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to talk about repricing. So this is an important part of online book arbitrage, and this is pillar number 4 out of 5, and this is video number 5 out of our 6-part series on online book arbitrage. I will put a link below so you can check out the other videos related to online book arbitrage. All right, so repricing. So today we're going to talk about why do we need to reprice. We're going to talk about the different repricing methods. We're going to talk about how third-party repricers work. We're going to talk a little bit about Amazon's repricer. And finally, I'm going to give you a few tips on repricing. All right, so why reprice? All right, so when you purchase your book or when you initially price your book, market conditions can change, right? You could be priced too high, you could be priced too low. So you're going to want to periodically change the price so you can be competitive, so you can get more sales, so you can get more profits, right? And I got to tell you, when you first start off, when you start doing online book arbitrage or selling books, this is something you really don't think about too much. But I can tell you, and others will tell you who've been around, who may have been in my shoes, where you started off selling books, and yeah, you sell a bunch of books, but you're not repricing really. You're kind of just setting your price out there and see what happens. Once you start repricing, you'll see your sales to pick up quite a bit, right? So it is an important part of the business, repricing your books. Now, what do the others say, right? A lot of the software companies or software tools that help you reprice, they're going to tell you, drive sales, increase ROI. They talk a lot about getting the buy box. So all those things are important when it comes to why you want to reprice. All right, so how do you reprice? Now, there's basically what I'm going to say is 3 different ways of doing it. First is the manual way. That means just simply going into Seller Central and adjusting your price, right? Typically, you're going to be, probably looking at the other offers, maybe looking at the Keep It charts, and you're adjusting your price periodically using the manual method. Now, let me say this about the manual method. This is, you could say it's really good or it's really bad. The thing is, it's probably more accurate at that moment in time when you're repricing it manually. The challenge or the problem with doing that manually is that if you have hundreds or especially thousands of books, it is very, very time consuming to do this manually, right? So that's why there are third-party tools out there. That's why Amazon has a repricer, as to why you'd want to utilize that, right? It can be a big time saver. But if you want to be, I'd say more accurate, probably looking at everything with your own eyes is probably a better way to go when it comes to repricing. But again, double-edged sword, can take quite a bit of time. All right, so that leads me to my next one, which is software, right? The software tools out there are going to basically do that for you or help you with that. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And the third way I'm going to say is combinations. What I mean by that, and this is what I do, right? You might do a combination of manually repricing while at the same time using a software tool. And if you want to get even a little more advanced, I've done this, don't do this anymore, you can actually use multiple repricers at the same time. All right, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You can do that. It's a little more advanced, and you might be able to take advantages of some of the repricers. They have different methodologies of how they go about it and different tools and tricks that they do, and maybe you can combine those two. All right, that's way more advanced, but I think that pretty much covers the way that you would typically do repricing. All right, so how do the third-party repricers work? All right, so I'll talk about the most common, and this is with having the repricer modify your prices for you. Okay, so the thing you need to understand is that when you set up a repricer, they are all going to do this. They are going to ask you for the minimum and maximum price. Okay, so you are in charge. You need to understand that you are in charge of setting your minimum and maximum. And then when you set that, whatever they do, they're going to attempt to change in between those two things, right? So you have to remember that if you're not getting the results, for example, of the repricer for whatever reason, you can't always blame the repricer, right? Maybe your minimum is way too high above what all the other sellers, and your maximum price is even higher. at that point, it really doesn't matter what repricing rule you have or what repricing software you're using. You're just not going to get sales, or you might get a sale here or there, but it's going to be very, very difficult, right? So you need to understand that you are the one that is in charge of setting your minimum and maximum price, okay? So if you get that wrong, you're going to be in trouble, all right? So that's important to understand. The other thing is some of them, they work differently in that some of them will give you real-time updates. What I mean by that is, or continuous, if you want to think of it that way, they're going to change your price almost instantly, right? Let's say, for example, you're trying to match the lowest FBA price, and your software, as soon as your competitor changes their price, your price will change immediately. That's one way they do it. Some of the other ones will change it periodically, you know, or you can set it. Maybe I want to change it only once a day, or I want to change it 6 times throughout the day at these hours of the day. All kinds of things you can do. Now the rules. So here, kind of, let me just give you the basics, right? There's you know, the different softwares. That's, you know, one of the many things that they'll separate themselves is what kind of rules do they have. So the most basics I'll tell you are, and I'm going to coming from an FBA perspective, but of course you can use repricing with any product, but certainly with merchant fulfilled as well. But you might want to match the lowest FBA price, right? That's a basic rule. You want to match the used buy box. You want to be 4% over the lowest FBA. Those are kind of, you know, real basic ones. And then the ones that are a little more advanced, where you say, okay, I want to be in this slot, or I want you to use your algorithm just to try to drive up sales, right? They have these algorithms that say that, hey, we're going to look at the other offers and we're just going to try to drive sales, meaning maybe you're going to lower you by a penny until they get to the bottom, right? Or they are going to try to just simply maximize ROI, right? There's lots and lots of different tools out there and different methodologies, but that's essentially how they work, right? It really starts with, you know, setting the minimum, setting the maximum, then setting up the rule, uploading your inventory to them or putting it in manually, and then having the repricer tool work for you, okay? Now, there's 3 issues that I'm going to say, well, really 2 issues, but the thing with the repricers that you need to understand there, if you're looking on their website, they're not going to tell you this right up front, right? And your favorite YouTube video telling you that XYZ repricing tool also isn't going to tell you this, because likely whoever made that video is getting an affiliate, right, for promoting that. And there's really nothing wrong with that, but I want to make sure you understand this up front. Two major things. Well, the first thing is, first of all, they're not free, right? Obviously, you're going to be paying for these things month in and month out, right? So that's the first thing you need to know. But the other 2 things is, first, I don't know of any one of them that will account for demand. What I think is the proper way to account for demand. Let me give you just a very quick example. Let's just say you're coming up on Christmas time, you have a Christmas book, you have a bunch of Christmas books, and you can obviously see by looking at the Keep It charts or just using your common sense that, hey, the demand of this book is going to increase quite a bit. And, you know, maybe it's October or maybe you're getting into November, you're going to want to hold on to that book and wait for the demand to pick up, and then, you know, possibly the price go up significantly, right? The repricers typically are, I don't know of any repricer that's going to know that, really. You know, they're not looking at historical data and are able to tell that that will ever happen, right? So that's the first thing. They're not going to really account for upcoming demand. So that's one example of the Christmas book. But, you know, the other big one, of course, is textbooks, right? So if you're repricing textbooks, you know, they're not going to really know that it's, hey, it's coming up upon textbook season, and this book is going to pick up demand quite a bit, and historically the price has always gone up quite a bit in July or in January. So those are things that you'll have to be aware of. The repricers won't do for you, but you can do manual, right? So it is a trade-off. All right, and the other big significant issue is there are blind spots in the repricers. And what I mean by that is they all use Amazon's data, Amazon's API, and they supply the third-party softwares with this information. But for whatever reason, Amazon doesn't want to give them all the data. They only give them some of the data. So this isn't really the repricer's fault or anything. It's just the world that we live in having to deal with Amazon, and this is what they've chosen to do. So what they do is they supply you with the 20 lowest prices on a particular offer. So if you are, for example, trying to say, I want to do something simple like match the lowest FBA price, and the lowest FBA price, like in this example, is, in the 23rd slot, and that price changes, and you're expecting to match that because the price changed, your repricer isn't going to work at that point. Okay? And it's just the way it is. And so that can be very frustrating. My recommendation for you is you need to try to figure out how much of your inventory is not being repriced. And I think some of the repricers do a really good job. They'll tell you, they'll give you a report, hey, these aren't being repriced because you're priced out of our API or out of Amazon's API, and maybe you can address it that way, right? But at one time, I was doing a lot of textbooks, a lot of very low ranked textbooks, and I was having all kinds of problems with my repricer. 65% of them weren't even being repriced, and I ended up spending an awful lot of time, having to do administration to fix those issues. So, depending on the mix of books that you have, this could be a significant issue for you. But if you have a lot of, certainly if you're a merchant fulfilled seller, I'd say, yeah, you're not going to have this much. You're not going to have this issue as much as an FBA seller. So it's just something to definitely be aware of. And what you don't want to do is just think that your books are being repriced when in fact they are not. And it's because of this loophole, blind spot, whatever you want to call it. All right, so be aware of that if you're going to use a third-party repricer. All right, let's talk about Amazon's repricer. Okay, so now Amazon repricer works the same way in that it has the minimum and maximum values that you have to establish, and then you've got your rules. But Amazon's repricer is free, right? So it is not going to have many of the bells and whistles that you'll get with the paid repricers, right? They are not going to give you as good a reports, that's for sure. The rules, you're going to have a limited amount of rules, such as you can't just say, I don't want to reprice against this particular seller. That's not something you can do. They're not going to do any kind of, they're not going to raise your price, right? This is a big beef with people saying, hey, it always races to the bottom. You'll hear that an awful lot with Amazon's repricers. With Amazon's repricer, right? Once it goes down, it stays down until you change the price again. So that's not to be confused with the fact that you don't need to set your rule that way. You can, with Amazon's repricer, price above everyone, right? Say I want to be, X% above the buy box. I want to be X% above the lowest FBA. You can do all that stuff with Amazon's repricer. So it depends on what rule that you set up. All right, but the big advantage Amazon has over all of the third-party repricers is they do not have that API limitation of not repricing you when you're not within those 20, right? So if you're using Amazon's repricer and say, hey, I always want to match the lowest FBA, it will always match the lowest FBA. You're not going to just have it not repriced. So that is the big advantage of using Amazon's repricer. All right, and I will make a separate video because I am very familiar with Amazon's repricer. I'll make a separate video of this, and I may make a separate video on another repricer. So if you have a favorite repricer, please leave a comment below and I'll take a look at it. All right, your first repricing tip is really more of a concept that you need to understand. All right, so let's look at this simple example. Let's say we have these two books here, Book A and Book B. We're buying them for $15, and in Book A, we're going to sell it at $55. We're making over a $26 profit. ROI is great, 179%. So if I were to give you this to you and say, which book would you rather have, right? Everybody is immediately going to say, I'd rather have Book A, right? More profit, more ROI. But what you need to understand, there's another piece of this puzzle that is left out. And that is what I'm going to say is sales velocity, okay? So what if I told you that over a period of time, Book A is not going to sell as fast as Book B for whatever reason? And keep in mind, I'm not only referring to the average sales rank, right? What we did here is we lowered the price. We bought the same book for $15, and this could be the exact same book, right? We're going to sell it at $55, but if we lower the price, we're going to sell that book quicker, right? And that is really, big picture, that's what happens, right? Customers, and you can see that time and time again when you look at a Keepa chart, as the price increases, sales tend to slow, right? As the price comes down, sales increase, right? Customers like to pay less. So that's what will happen. So in this example, if I were to ask you which one would you rather have, right? You may not know it offhand, right? But here's the math, and here's what comes away. And this sales velocity, by the way, is over a period of time. It doesn't really matter whether we're saying it's a year or 8 months or whatever it is, right? But the point being that if you lower the price to $45, it's going to sell more, your profits are going to be lower, and your ROI for that particular book. But let's see what happens. Your year-end net profit is actually going to be higher with book B. Okay, so you guys need to understand that. It's really important, right? I've run into a lot of people that just say, you know what, I want to make X% of ROI, or I need to make this amount of profit, and I'm going to let it sit there at that price until it sells. Okay, well, that sounds good on paper, right? And that makes sense, but a couple things. Number one, Amazon does not really care what you want to make, okay? And sometimes what ends up happening, you end up sitting on that book for a long period of time, then you end up lowering your price anyway, right? So you're probably better off lowering your price a little bit from the very start, and maybe your sales velocity would go up, right? And your year-end profit would go up. And the other big part of this is your Amazon payout, right? Your cash flow, right? In this business, I have the opportunity to speak to a lot of different sellers, right? I have yet to run into anybody that's telling me that they have an endless supply of cash to buy books, right? So that's really important, is your cash flow, right? You want to get more payouts from Amazon, and that's what will happen, when you increase your sales velocity. So in this example, we would have, if you can see, more than almost $100 more in cash flow by lowering the price, because the sales velocity would have gone up. All right, so it's just something you definitely want to keep in the back of your mind. You don't necessarily need to go into the math. The point being is that if you lower your price, you want to get your maximum selling price, of course, but if you lower the price with the thought of being able to increase your sales velocity, instead of just thinking that you're going to lower your profits for that particular book, think of it as you are going to increase your profits over time, and you're going to increase your cash flow. Okay, so really important concept to understand, and that's going to fit nicely into reprice and why we reprice. All right, the next tip is really another concept, and it has to do with the minimum and maximum price that I mentioned earlier. So if you recall, you are in charge of setting these things up. And the concept you need to understand is that the closer the minimum is to the maximum, the less important the rule is, and the less important the repricer you're using is. Okay? You have to look at what's your profit. You need to know what your break-even point is, and when you have that information, it makes it easier for you to say something like in this example that we showed earlier about the $15. It says, all right, you know what, I'm going to make my maximum price $55. I'd love to sell it at $55. But if I put my minimum all the way down to $45, $10 less, I'm going to still make a $19 profit on this book. My ROI is over 100%. And guess what? My books are probably going to sell faster in this scenario. Okay? So important to understand about when you set the minimum and maximum. You are in charge, and that is going to have an impact on the rule itself, right? The rule becomes far less important if your minimum and maximum are right near one another. The next one, tip number 3, I've already mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again. If you're going to look at some of these other third-party repricers, make sure you understand how much of your inventory is not being repriced. Okay, a lot of booksellers will sign up for a service. They won't even know what I've already talked about, that the repricer may not be working on all your books, and then they don't know why their repricer isn't working. That could be the reason. The next one, number 4, this is also very important. I've already mentioned, I will mention it again. If you have textbooks, you want to make sure that you're repricing before textbook season. Okay, and typically, especially if you have textbooks that are going to be selling quickly, you usually do not want to have those set. You do not want to have those set to match the lowest price in the beginning of textbook season, right? If the demand is going to be significant in whether it's, starting in the first week of January or in July, August timeframe, you would rather, be held back a little bit, be in a lower slot, see what's going on with the market. Then if you need to lower your price, in some cases, you're going to have to increase your price. Okay. Tip number 5, if you're going to use these other the third-party repricers and you only want to use the basic rules, like let's say you want to match the lowest FBA or you want to match the buy box, you're going to want to ask yourself, why am I using the third-party repricer if I'm paying month in, month out, when I could be using Amazon's repricer and I know it will work time in and time again, okay? But you really want to understand that if you're going to use a third-party repricer, I would prefer to pay for some of the other bells and whistles that I've already mentioned that they have, right? Whether they're going to try to do some algorithm thing or they're going to be able to do a lot of things that Amazon's repricer won't be able to do. All right, so just consider that if you're going to use a third-party repricer. Just understand a lot of those basic rules, or some of those basic rules, could be used by Amazon's repricer for free, and it'll save you some money month in and month out. All right. Tip number 6: if you have a very small amount of inventory, then you may not even need a repricer. You may just want to start off manually repricing. Okay, that means just going in and changing your price, every week or whatever. And that again is going to have to be dependent upon how much inventory you have and how much time do you have to manually reprice. Okay, that's tip number 6. All right, tip number 7. Now this is really, really important, I think, because some people don't seem to understand this. Okay, you should be perfectly okay with selling any of your books at the minimum price at all times. Okay, so I sometimes cringe when I hear people say, oh, it fell to the bottom. Well, talking about the repricer and whether it's Amazon's repricer or even a third-party repricer, right? Oh, it's just going to the bottom. Well, who's in charge of setting that price? You are. Okay, so if you are not happy with selling a book at the minimum, then guess what? Raise your minimum. Okay, don't blame your repricer. Okay, so I have all my books, thousands of books on Amazon. I've got minimum prices. If they were to all sell tomorrow at my minimum price, well, something would be very odd, right? That would be, there would be an anomaly going on. But I would be perfectly okay with selling every single one of those books at my minimum price because I have control of my inventory, all right? I understand that I am in control, not my repricer, okay? And I think you should have that attitude, right? You want to be in control of your inventory, and you don't want to feel that the repricer is taking control of your inventory. Rather, I look at it as the repricer is working for me, and it's going to do what I tell it to do. Okay, so that's the way you should think of it. So if you're not okay with, if the price is too low for your minimum, then it shouldn't be there, right? You should be raising it, okay? And then you're not going to have an issue and say, oh, it's sold at the minimum, right? Of course, we would all like to sell our books at the maximum price, but I don't think of it that way. I just think of all my books as a collection, and at the end of the day, I want to have cash flow every week, and I want to make plenty of profit. And you do that by setting your maximum, your minimum, and the price rules accordingly. Okay? All right, and your final tip 8 is pay attention to your IPI score. All right, now I'm not going to get into IPI score in detail in this video, but you may be wondering, why is he talking about IPI score? I thought we were talking about a repricing tips. Well, the reason I mention your IPI score is because we can't all reprice the same way, okay? Even if we had the exact same books, we bought them at the same price and all that. And the reason for that is that someone that has a very low IPI score, they do not want to go really low, right? If you go below Amazon's threshold, then you can't even send in any more books, right? So that becomes very, very important, right? So if your IPI score is low, you want to raise it. And the way you raise it is by driving sales. And the way you drive sales, like I say, is using a repricer helps, right? Lowering your selling price, but knowing that, hey, you're still going to make a profit, you're making great ROI, but I'm going to lower my price so I can increase my sales velocity. Increasing your sales velocity will increase your IPI score, Okay. Now, if you have a really high IPI score, you're up near 600 or higher, then you are less concerned maybe about driving profits right away, right? And you can say, you know what, I know this book doesn't sell very often. I'm just going to sit on it for 3 months, whatever the time frame, and I'm not going to look at it because I know I'm going to, triple my money or whatever. And I can do that because my IPI score is very high, right? So you need to pay attention to your IPI score. I would look at it weekly and just keep that in the back of your mind when you're repricing, because as you reprice, and your sales go up, your IPI score will go up as well.